Welcome back. Again, some recent record purchases by myself. I discovered a record shop in Vienna. It's not a new shop, but for some reason I never was aware of it. Although I often go by it, but it's really a bit hidden. So it's probably not the best at marketing itself. It's not one of the most or more popular or well known amongst record collectors shops in Vienna. But yeah, yesterday, for some reason, fate wanted me to find it, and I was pleasantly surprised because I was at a phase at the moment where I want to complete my Jorge Ben, Brazilian artist, Tropicalia movement. I want to kind of complete my collection, which is very different because many of his records, it's really hard to get them for reasonable prices outside of Brazil. Um, and in this shop, this shop is kind of specialized in Brazilian and Tropicalia music and that stuff. And I found a ton of Jorge Ben albums that I didn't have yet. Completing Jorge Ben, I mean the 60s and 70s stuff, and maybe also the 80s stuff at one point, but it's mainly completing the 60s and 70s stuff. I'm not sure if I'm so interested in his post mid 80s stuff, but maybe I will be when I have all the others. Um, but this was about filling the gaps of my 60s collection of Jorge Ben first and foremost, and I found really lots of records, not just the Jorge Ben, but also. This is a compilation, and this is not really a Jorge Ben album, although this cover was also a cover of a Jorge Ben album from 1967. But this is a compilation of people covering Jorge Ben. He's such a great songwriter. Jorge Ben is maybe one of the best singer-songwriters of all time. And in the Western world, Brazil is also kind of the Western world, but in the Latin American or Portuguese speaking world, he's probably one of the most underrated songwriters of all time because he's in the same league as a Bob Dylan or Lennon McCartney or someone like that, to me at least, and I think to many Brazilians as well. He's a great songwriter, and he wrote great songs for other artists, songs he specifically wrote for other artists, or songs that became big hits when other artists covered his stuff. Amongst them is, a kind of cover which wasn't really an official cover is, for example, Do You Think I'm Sexy by Rod Stewart, where Jorge Ben or his publishers went to court and they could prove that, that Rod Stewart nicked the melody from Jorge's great song Taj Mahal. But there's also other groups like one of the best Brazilian groups of all time, Os Mutantes, like the Brazilian Beatles. They made a big hit or their biggest hit probably was Menina Menina, which is also written by Jorge Ben. This is the kind of a compilation or like a tribute album. This is other artists, mostly Brazilian artists, covering this great songwriter. Then there's a few non-Jorge Ben albums I purchased in this shop, also kind of completing collections. This is one of the few Talking Heads albums that was still missing in my collection. This is the last one they did before they split up. I think the other one that's now missing from my collection is one of the biggest classics. This is not one of the biggest classics. Some people would say they split up at the right time, but I like their later stuff. For example, True Stories, the album before that, is one of my favorite Talking Heads albums. But the other one that's still missing my collection is, believe it or not, their debut album, which is a big classic. But one day I will also get their debut album with Psycho Killer and so on. The Talking Heads. This one is another one. These are all albums I found in this record shop. Black Monk is the name of the shop, but you can't really find it in Vienna because it hasn't even written record shop or Black Monk record shop written on its on its storefront. It's really very obscure. I think the owner should do more to promote it probably. But this is something I was always interested. Lebanese. In Lebanon there was, maybe still is, but especially was a great movement for funk and funky disco music in the 70s, 80s. and this is me tapping, you know, the first step into this direction with this release, Shara Yet El Disco, Egyptian. Oh, this is from Egypt. It's okay. That's not Lebanon. Egyptian disco and boogie cassettes, 1982 to 1992. But this was in the section of the record shop that was, you know, focused on Lebanese funk and disco music. But for some reason, this is an Egyptian one. But I guess it's also cool to have it. And now the Jorge Ben stuff. These are all albums I haven't yet had in my collection. I mean, I know most of it from Spotify. Those albums, I think all or most of those albums are also on Spotify. But you know, it's always different to listen to it on a record or even on a CD, because for some reason you care more about it, you pay more attention, at least I do. You know, Spotify, listening to Spotify, I'm always distracted by something else. You know, I'm not really a fan of Spotify. It's really not my thing. But now I can really listen more deeply to those records. This is one of his first records. I think it's probably his second record from 1964, I guess. His first album came out in 1963. And it's one of the best albums from 1963 in general. This must have been his second, maybe third, but I think his second album, Esamba Bomb. Then this is the self-titled. This is from the mid-60s more. I think it's from 65, 66, 67, probably 66. Yeah, another one. Then this is kind of a classic that I never found before. You know, when I'm looking for it and I see it on Discogs, it's usually with shipping from Brazil, especially. It's really hard to get it under €100, and then you don't even know in which condition it gets delivered. But this is really a mint repress. This is not even second hand from Negro Elindo. This is from the early 70s, I guess 1970 or 71, which is his big phase. You know, that's his classic phase when he made his best music. And you know, I'm glad I finally have Negro Elindo in my collection. Yeah, those were the Jorge Ben albums I bought there. The other one, he had several others as well, but those I myself already had. Then I bought a classic by Frank Zappa. You know, I'm not really a Frank Zappa fan, but lately I'm getting into his early stuff. You know, the Mothers of Invention, late 60s, mid to late 60s stuff, and I really like that stuff. I know I'm not going to like most of his post 60s stuff, because I think I have a best of album, and I'm of course familiar with some of the more legendary songs, and I'm not really into that noodly jazz kind of music. But Shake Your Booty is one of his more approachable, more pop solo albums. It includes the big hit Bobby Brown Goes Down, of course, and I'm kind of familiar because I think my mother has or had it in her collection. So from childhood, you know, it's not really the music a child should listen to, but I couldn't understand English at that time anyway. But I have child memories of, you know, these records as a CD getting played in my mother's home where I grew up. Now for our gold, Dire Straits. I'm not a big Dire Straits fan, but I respect them, and this was still missing. You know, there's a couple still missing. This is my third Dire Straits album now in my collection. I have Brothers in Arms and Making Music, so this is my number 3. Then I never owned a vinyl copy of Prince's debut album For You, but now I do. I think I will like it. I mean, again, this is one I know from Spotify, from not really paying much attention, but kind of knowing it from Spotify. I know I will like it because it's a phase, the very early phase of Prince, that I really, really like, because I'm a big fan of his second album, which is just called Prince. And this is more his disco, his funky disco phase, and I really like the Prince album. So I think the Prince album is a bit of a progress from this, so I expect it not to be as good, but you know, it's his debut album, so it's really, if you're a Prince fan, and I'm a kind of a Prince fan, it's really kind of necessary to own it in your collection. And then Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you know, this is strange. I 1 year ago I would not have believed that me in the future would ever sit here and hold a Emerson, Lake and Palmer album here into the camera or even owning one, listening to it. But you know, that's Murdoch's fault. You know, Murdoch's Music Minute. We did some on his and some on my channel. I don't know if we did the Emerson, Lake and Palmer episode on my channel, but check out Murdoch's Music Minute, the YouTube channel. But we did some videos about him trying to get me into prog music. You know, I'm a kind of a prog hater, or I used to be. And you know, some of those attempts worked. I think Emerson, Lake and Palmer is the group he least expected. It's me liking it. But the one we listened to together, what's it called, Brain Surgery Salad or something like that, I really liked it. It was one of my favorite albums of these prog hater meets prog lover videos. I think Murdoch expected me to prefer, you know, bands like Genesis or Yes to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but I have to say I very much prefer Emerson, Lake and Palmer to Yes and Genesis. So I'm looking forward to it. You know, since I don't know anything or not much about Emerson, Lake and Palmer and their discography, I don't know if this is regarded one of the better, best, worst, not so good albums. I know that Love Beach is considered the worst, but you know, this is the album I'm most intrigued with. I want, you know, I really, if I see Love Beach in a record shop next time, I'm going to buy it because I just love the cover so much. It's such a strange cover for such a band. And this is also kind of a weird cover. You know, they more often than not on the covers they look more like the Beach Boys than like a prog band. But they're considered the most prog of all 70s prog bands. But yeah, I like the album, this Brain Surgery album, and I have no expectations for this because I don't know anything about it. I don't even know which phase in their career this is. I mean, it looks like mid-70s, judging by their hair. Yeah, we'll check this out. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.